thing that we learned yesterday about meiosis was using a few of the terms. Okay, so we learned terms like gametes. What's gametes? Sex cells, that's right. Okay, and what were the male sex cells? Sperm. And in plants, what was it? Pollen, right, awesome. And what's the females? Eggs or zygote. Awesome. Well done. Okay, so male gametes are the sperm, combines with the female gamete, the egg. The embryo develops through cell division, mitosis to a mature offspring. Okay? Actually, what I'll do is let me pull up yesterday's lesson and we'll just go through the summary on it. There's not much here. Let me get a little bit more. Okay. You two guys need to separate. It's about the 4th day in a row. All right. Okay, there are 2 types of cells. Somatic or body cells use mitosis to reproduce cells for growth and repair. These cells have a diploid number of chromosomes and are identical to the parent cell. Reproductive cells produce 2 types of gametes called a sperm and an egg. These cells have a haploid number of chromosomes in order that when the sperm combines with an egg, the offspring will have a diploid number of chromosomes. There are 2 steps to complete cell reproduction by meiosis. The first step is a reduction step where the chromosomes are reduced from a diploid number to a haploid number. The step is called meiosis. The next step is a division step where the 2 daughter cells divide to produce 4 daughter cells. This step is called meiosis 2. Okay, let's kind of go back right now. And we'll see if you guys can help with this. All right? What I want to do is I want to start by, first of all, diploid means how many chromosomes do we have? Okay, which is what? 46. Awesome. Okay, so to begin with, that guy, remember on the Khan Academy, we started with 2N here, right? Okay, and then during the meiosis part, they divide up into 2 other haploid cells, right? So the parent cell, so this is mom and dad's cell, all right? This divides off into 2 of you, basically, is what happens there, right? That's how we kind of figured it out. And then it splits up and allows us to now reproduce. So we have this right here. So we end up with 4 haploid cells in which you still have the genetics of mom and dad there, right? You have part of mom and part of dad in all these haploid cells. Now what happens? Well, what then occurs is somewhere along the way, if these are all male sperm cells, right? They're haploid cells, the female egg is going to take one of those haploid cells, and they're going to combine, right? And once one of these guys goes down here to right there, now what happens? I have another parent cell, another diploid cell, right? And it's carrying all the male genetics and all the female genetics. And they combine and they form another parent cell, which is another kid.
So like a parent cell is when like 2 cells form together.
That's right. That's exactly right. After each one has done this splitting, right, through the process of meiosis. And then at some point this sperm cell is going to reproduce with the female egg cell. Right?
George, would there ever be more than one cell going into another cell?
Well, that's what we talked about yesterday, right? The twins, how the twins happen. But twins actually didn't happen because of an excess of sperm cell in the egg cell, did it? It happened because of a splitting of the egg cell.
So it's like if you're older, you have better chance of having like twins.
Yeah. Or if your mother has twins in the family.
Yeah, there.
Then
That isn't like the same for identical twins, so it was like
fraternal.
fraternal.
That's right. Good job. Good job. You guys learned lots yesterday. That's fantastic. Okay, any other comments or questions about that? All right. I thought yesterday was an excellent class. I learned probably as much or more than every one of you when it comes to this biology. Like I said, I haven't done this in a lot of years. So then we had this step is called meiosis 2. Now, we had 5 phases as well for meiosis 1. What were those 5 phases? Early prophase,
Late prophase,
late prophase,
Anaphase,
anaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And then meiosis 2 was the prophase again?
Yeah.
Right? Meiosis 2, and that was the splitting. And that splitting part was this guy right here. Right?
Yeah.
It was prophase, right? There was 2 prophases to start with and then prophase at the end. Okay? We're all alright with that so far?
Yeah.
Okay. We watched a few videos, tried to learn a little bit from Khan Academy, and we had a really good day with that yesterday. Cracks. Yeah. Tough day to miss.
Those videos were good.
Yeah.
I got your individual lesson again.
Eric, you learned that down.
We'll show you some more here, yeah.
What happens?
Okay, so here's what I was talking about. And actually, it comes up now. The sperm and the eggs. So most animals have 2 sexes. The male produces sperm and the female produces the eggs. These gametes are produced in reproductive organs called gonads. Okay? So the sperm are produced in the male gonad called the testes. Since the sperm contain 4 different sets of genetic information, they're capable of producing 4 different offspring depending on which sperm fertilizes the egg. So that's the new part of today that we didn't discuss. So when we go into right here, these are all not genetically identical, right? Each one of them carries a bit of different information. They may have more of mom than dad, or may have more dad than mom. And that's why the second generation often will look more like one of the family members. One will be more on dad's side of the family, and one will be more of the mom's side of the family. Or they both could be both dad's side, but that's what happens, right? So when we're talking genetics here, these 4 all have different information. They're all coming from mom and dad, but they have different amounts of each. Okay? So that's what this is all about right here. So meiosis 1 split up into the 2. So now we're at haploid cells, right? At this point, so we had a parent cell, which was a diploid cell. Now we've got 2 haploid cells. And now what happens is meiosis 2 works much similar to what mitosis is, okay? But it's not exactly the same as mitosis. These are not exactly the same. They split up into here, and now we have 4 sets of genetic information coming from that cell. So we have 4 haploid sperm cell, sperms produced. The eggs, down on the bottom. The eggs are from the female are come from the ovaries. Ovaries produce eggs. Only 1 egg cell receives enough cytoplasm to survive. So there's an interesting part of the information. So the sperm we know there's millions of them, right? But in the female, they don't produce eggs like the sperm. There's not millions of sperm. There's 1 egg that gets produced, okay? And it's 1 haploid egg that's produced. So that's often why it's difficult for pregnancy. And then they talk about, the first thing they'll tell you when it comes to pregnancy is, when are you doing it? Okay, when are you trying to become pregnant? Because there is the female cycle, of course. There are different times in which it's better for them to conceive. Okay, so that's the first thing that happens when they do it. So then the second way is if that doesn't work and you've tried and tried, then you go to the method in which they take the sperm and they actually implant it right onto the egg and then put it back into the female. Okay? So this is why. Alright? Because unlike the male sperm, which just keeps reproducing itself, right? The egg doesn't have that. Okay, any questions about that? Hopefully not, because I probably can't answer it. All right. All right, so from there, what happens? Well, the sperm meets the egg, right? So formation, and once the sperm meets the egg, we get a diploid cell, right? Because now we have two sets of chromosome information. Get the male and the female. So the diagram below shows the process of fertilization where two gametes with 23 chromosomes each combine to form a single zygote with 23 pairs of chromosomes. Notice that the cell duplication occurs by mitosis after fertilization has taken place. So you've got your egg and your sperm. They come together right here. And at that point, you get your 23 pairs of chromosomes. And we now refer to this no longer as the egg and the sperm, but we refer to it as a zygote. Okay? And the zygote then, as it starts to fertilize, okay, then the embryo occurs, which is the newborn. Right? Okay? Anything, questions, comments? The embryo develops and matures through mitosis. So much like us, you know, when you have the cut and your skin heals or your blood keeps reproducing, that's all through the process of mitosis. Well, that's how the baby forms as well. And it makes sense, right? There's more, they just continue to make more cells, and more cells through mitosis, the duplication of it, and that's how our embryo develops. The cycle shown above illustrates how meiosis is necessary for gametes to be produced. Once fertilization has occurred, mitosis reproduces a single cell until an embryo is produced and eventually birth occurs. All animals must meet two requirements for this cycle to be completed. The male and female gametes must come together. Mating is the process whereby the male and the female come together for combining gametes. Some animals mate once per year, timed so the offspring will be born when the weather conditions are favorable. It's a little suspect. It depends on the weather, but anyways. I thought it was just a myth about cold winters, but maybe it's something to be said. Sydney?
I heard that animals, like deer and that, they can control their birth. They could give the baby whenever they wanted.
Yeah. So
like if a winter is really harsh on the deer, they'll absorb one or two of the babies because naturally they actually get fertilized with 3 eggs, but usually they drop one and it's like, yeah, it's kind of perfect.
weird.
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about that. Thanks, girls. Random knowledge, right? We're learning. We're all learning together. The zygote must receive food, moisture, warmth, and protection, all of which mama provides, right? Okay? So she feeds the embryo. Moisture is the fluid sac that the embryo is growing inside. Warmth, obviously, is the body heat. And protection is her shell, her skin, and whatever else protects the embryo, right? Okay. Give me masters of this right away. All right, so how do plants do it different? Okay, this is going to be actually a fair bit interesting. One of the reasons I find it interesting is, and we'll go to that in a minute, one of the reasons I find it interesting is there was an article out the other day about a guy that's a beekeeper and kind of pleading to the public to leave dandelions in their yards. Okay, does anybody know why they would leave dandelions? Go ahead, Ross.
That's food for the bees.
Food for the bees, and it allows them to, first of all, eat, plus that's how they pollinate the plants themselves, right? Okay, so by getting rid of the food the bees or the food that the bees eat, it's taking a toll on the population of it. So we're going to learn today as much as we can about plant reproduction and how it works. Okay? For additional information on this topic, follow the flower and plant reproduction link under the web links. The male sex cell is called pollen, and it is produced by the anthers. So just have a quick look here. So pollen is the kind of flaky stuff that's on the end. The anthers are the ends of the plants themselves. All right? So there's a couple ways in which that pollen spreads. What are they? Well, insects, right? Not just bees, but they're, anything else. And what's the other way? Wind. Absolutely. Wind is another way in which those plants pollinate. Have you ever see the white dandelions, the fluffy dandelions? What happens to them? They blow apart, and then more and more and more, pollen goes all over the place. All right. Pollen, which looks like a fine powder, is transferred by wind or insects to the stigma of the pistil and grows a pollen tube to the egg through the pistil. The nucleus of the pollen grain travels down the pollen tube to the egg in the ovary where fertilization occurs. After fertilization, the egg develops into an embryo. After some time, seeds are produced. The process of fertilizing the egg cells is the same in plants as animals. So basically, it's the mating part that's different between plants and animals. Okay? Once the pollinated or the pollen is in the egg, it uses the same cell division that we use. Okay, of meiosis. All right. After fertilization, the egg develops into an embryo. After some time, seeds are produced. The process of fertilizing an egg is the same as plants and animals. There's male sex cell pollen and a female sex cell, the egg, which must combine to form the zygote. The zygote in turn develops into an embryo, and eventually the seed is produced. The apple is an example of a fruit that contains seeds that are produced in this way. The following diagram shows the reproductive structures of a typical flower with the petals removed. Okay. So you have a receptacle down here. Your eggs are inside the receptacle. The pollen tube. The ovary, anthers are the ends that carry the pollen, or they're the ones that produce the pollen, and then the stigma is the part of the pollen tube itself. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, let's see where this leads us to. Nowhere. Okay, so let's go back. We're going to go to, that's ASU, identical twins. Let's go here, and we're going to go back to Khan Academy and see if we can find it.
Do you watch these videos lots?
Do I watch them lots?
Yeah.
No.
You don't use that?
I used it for a full year. I had to teach an economics class, and I knew nothing about economics. And so we used Khan Academy almost every single day for it. I wish I had something like this when I was in high school, or especially university, because the explanations are phenomenal on this site, and it has every subject matter / topic you could possibly imagine. There's over 1 million lessons on here, right? So if you're looking for, well, like we do right now, biology, plant reproduction, it's on there. If you're looking for physics on electricity, it's on there, and it's right to the lesson. Any math topic you're doing on dividing fractions, Put it on there, it's there. It's a great website. Great website. Okay, so we're looking for a plant reproduction.
Here. Hold on. To the male. Which one?
As well as I wanted. Well, let's start with
He's got a single.
Maybe that one, the plants and the bees.
yeah, I'm gonna use it. I don't think it's exactly what we're looking for, but it'll give us a good idea.
A couple of weeks ago, I talked about a strategy for reproduction that the very first plants came up with called alternation of generation. The strategy that non-vascular plants still use today. Hopefully this is coming back to you. A plant can take two different forms that alternate back and forth between generations. The first form, the sporophyte, has diploid cells, 2 sets of chromosomes, and the second form, the gametophyte, has haploid cells, just 1 set of chromosomes. Well, a lot can happen in 470 million years. Today, vascular plants still use the basic alternation of generations model, but they've tricked it out so that it works a whole lot different than it did back in the Ordovician swamps where planthood got its start. Compared with their small, damp, non-vascular brethren, vascular plants with all their cones and flowers and other flashy accessories look like a bunch of drag queens at a Carmen Miranda conference and samba dance-off, which might seem like overkill, but when you rely on these crazy kooks and their upstart reproductive strategies for, well, pretty much for our everything. The food we eat, the air we breathe, the bouquets that we send to our wives and girlfriends when they're mad at us. Basically, what I'm saying is that we need vascular plants to have sex. So as you'll recall, the alternation of generations in non-vascular plants is pretty straightforward. A gametophyte produces either sperm or eggs, which find each other if it's wet enough for the sperm to swim to the nearest egg. Once the egg is fertilized, the gametophyte creates the sporophyte, which is a little capsule on a stalk that has a bunch of spores in it. The spores are released into the air, they land in a moist place, germinate, and bam, a new gametophyte generation is born. The non-vascular plants are what you call gametophyte dominant. What you're looking at when you look at a moss or a hornwort or a liverwort is the gametophyte. It's the form that has only 1 set of chromosomes. For them, the sporophytes are tiny and tucked away inside the gametophytes, which they rely on for food, water, and protection. But in vascular plants, it's the opposite. They're sporophyte dominant. When you look at a fern or a pine tree or a morning glory, you're looking at the sporophyte generation. And the gametophytes are the teeny tiny sex-making materials it has stashed away in special parts. So yes, all vascular plants are sporophyte dominant, but that does not mean that they all reproduce in the same way. No, sir. The simplest form of vascular plants are the ferns, which reproduce a lot like non-vascular plants in that they have spores that grow on the underside of the frond or fern leaf, which are released into the wild blue yonder to find a nice soggy patch of ground to germinate on. The spore then makes a tiny gametophyte, which is only a few centimeters wide and has both male and female reproductive organs on the underside of its leaves. If it's moist enough, the sperm on the boy side of the gametophyte will find the egg on the girl side, and it will create a sporophyte, which is what we recognize as a fern. There's a lot of fossil evidence to suggest that at one point there probably were ferns that produced seeds, and then all the fancy pants vascular plants that do have seeds and flowers evolved from them. But those seed-bearing ferns are all extinct now, so we can just gaze longingly at their fossils and wonder what their alternation of generations looked like. But there are other groups of plants that are more complex than ferns, and what they all have in common is that they reproduce by creating pollen, which contains the male gametophyte, and the female gametophytes or ovules, which are fertilized by the pollen. The complete fertilized cell grows into a seed, which ripens and can produce a complete adult plant. So, reiterating, in your more advanced vascular plants, that's how the alternation generation works. The sporophyte generation grows from a seed and produces tiny gametophytes, either pollen or ovules. They then combine to form another seed, which produces another sporophyte. This evolutionary change from spores to seeds was a big deal, and it began with the gymnosperms. Their single-serving plant-making packages cut out the middleman by allowing an adult plant to grow immediately from a seed, rather than having to wait for a spore to go through that intermediate gametophyte stage. It also means, in most cases, that there doesn't have to be water present in order to reproduce. Today, gymnosperms include conifers, ginkgos, and tropical palm-like plants called cycads. and none of them produce flowers because they evolved before flowers were invented. Instead, their reproductive structures are cones, and you've seen a few of these in your day. In fact, their name gymnosperm means naked seed, and that comes from the fact that their ovules develop exposed on the surface of the cone scales. Now, what we think of as cones are the spiky, woody things that Boy Scouts are throwing at each other at camp, right? But those things are actually female cones, which house the ovules. So male cones are smaller and kind of spongy, and their job is to crank out pollen. All this pollen is carried on the wind, and some of it might find its way to a female cone where it fertilizes the ovule located at the base of each of the scales of the female cone. As the fertilized embryo matures inside the cone, it makes a seed containing enough nutrients to sustain it for a while after it germinates. This seed has a tough, shiny casing.
He talks too fast.
Way too fast. Right? Let me go back. I just found something I wanted. We're gonna go through, and we may repeat. We may repeat a bit of yesterday, which is fine. Oh, here we go. Let's check this first.
Some plants are freaking great because they have this magical wizard power.
Not to do
That guy looks pretty interesting.
I think that's the same guy.
It was, definitely was.
You can tell.
Trigonometry.
Oh, yeah, we've done even from that.
Bro.
But definitely
Yeah.
no idea.
Whole book at once.
What that
What you do?
What?
Maybe the whole book at once with everything in the cracks.
It's so funny when you go.
Here.
You are.
Good, how are you?
Good, how's it going?
Yeah, we're doing alright. Watching Cell Division.
Are we
What
going
are you
home
saying?
at lunch? Mr. Wilson, we should still go home at lunch.
You think so, eh?
Well,
Because of the rain?
well, I don't know if we're gonna make it back down our gravel
I'm
roads.
worried about it. I know. I'll make that call shortly.
Our roads are just clay.
I know. For
Yeah.
your safety, we should send you home.
Well, you should. I don't want the bus to get stuck in the
So
road.
do I, hear you.
I'd have to be stuck in a thunderstorm.
I'll get right on that.
Okay.
I hope he's actually saying.
Thank you. That was very serious.
So let's talk a little bit about how we all came into being. What we see right over here, this is a picture of a sperm
I
cell,
don't think we saw this yesterday.
of a sperm cell fusing with an egg cell. That's a sperm
Okay,
cell.
we'll have a watch
This
this
is
then.
an egg cell. We call this an ovum.
Torpedo.
An ovum. And even this scene depicted right over here, this is the end of an epic competition. Because this sperm cell is one of 200 to 300 million that is vying for this ovum. So there's 200 to 300 million of these characters, and they're all vying for this ovum. And the one that you see that's about to fuse for it, this is the winner of this incredibly, this is, remember, 200 to 300 million to 300 million sperm are trying to get here. So this is a major victory. To some degree, we should all feel pretty good about ourselves because we are all the byproduct of that 1 in 200 to 300 million sperm cells that won this race getting to our mother's ovum. So the sperm cell came from our father, the egg cell, this is all happening inside of our mothers. The egg cell is from our mother. Now, once this happens, let's talk a little bit about the terminology. So once these two fuse, we call this or the process of them fusing, we call that fertilization. Fertilization. And it produces a cell that then differentiates into all of the cells of our body. So you can imagine this is an important process. So let's make sure that we understand the different terminology, the different words for the different things that are acting in this process. So each of these sex cells, I guess we could say, the sperm cell and the ovum, these are each called gametes. So this right over here is a gamete, and the ovum is a gamete. The egg cell is also a gamete. And as we'll see, each gamete has half the number of chromosomes as your body cells, or most of your or the somatic cells in your body. So outside of your sex cells, that might be in your ovaries or your testes, depending on whether you're male or female. These have half the number. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what I mean there. So let's just do a blow up of this sperm cell right over here. So blow up of the sperm cell. And I'm not going to draw it to scale. You see the sperm cell is much smaller than the egg cell, but just to get a sense. So let me draw the nucleus of this sperm cell. So just like that. If we're talking about a human being, and I'm assuming you're a human being, so that might be of interest to you, this will have 23 chromosomes from your father. So let's do them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And for the 23rd one, that's going to be your sex-determining chromosome. So if your father contributes an X, you are going to be female. If your father contributes a Y, you are going to be male. So these are the chromosomes in the male gamete, or I guess I say the gamete that your father's contributing, the sperm. So this is a gamete right over here. And then that's going to fuse with the egg, the ovum, that your mother is contributing. And once again, I'm not drawing that to scale. So this is
how we started class
this is
today, right?
the egg. Let me draw its nucleus. So that's its nucleus. Once again, this is drawn to scale. And your mother is also going to contribute 23 chromosomes. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. And then she will contribute an X chromosome for the sex determining. So your sex determining chromosomes are going to be XY, you're going to be male. If this was XX, you're going to be female. So this is also a gamete here. So a gamete is the general term for either a sperm or an egg. Now once these two things are fused, so once they are fused, what do we have? Once they're fused, then we're going to have you could say a fertilized egg, but we're going to call that a zygote.
Yep.
So this in a new color. I'm running out of space and I want this all to fit on the same piece, all on the same screen, so I'll draw it not quite at scale. And so let me draw the nucleus of the zygote. I'm going to make the nucleus fairly large so that we can focus on the chromosomes in it. Once again, none of this is drawn to scale. So you're going to have the 23 chromosomes from your father. So let me do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. And then the 23 chromosomes from your mother. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. So you got that X chromosome from your mother. And as you might have noticed, I've drawn them in pairs. So you now have a total, let me make it clear. You have 23 chromosomes here. 23 chromosomes in the sperm. You have 23 chromosomes in the egg. And now you have 46 chromosomes in the fertilized egg. 46 chromosomes. And now that we have a full contingent of chromosomes, and then this cell can now keep replicating, keep splitting, and differentiating into all of what makes you, you, we call this right over here, we call this a zygote. Zygote. So one way to think about it, the gametes are the sex cells that have half the number of chromosomes, and the zygote is the cell that's now ready to differentiate into an actual organism that has double the number, or that has a full contingency of chromosomes, that has 46 chromosomes. And you see how I made them in pairs. And these pairs, we call these homologous pairs. And in each of these pairs, this is a pair of homologous chromosomes. Pair of homologous chromosomes. Chromosomes. So what does that mean? Well, that means that in general, these two chromosomes, you got one from your father, one from your mother, they code for the same things. They code for the same proteins, but there are different variants of how they code for those proteins, those traits that you have. So, gross oversimplification is, let's say that there was a gene. Let's say that there is a gene on that one from your father that helps code for hair color. Well, there would be another variant of that gene on the chromosome from your mother that helps code for hair color as well. So these are homologous chromosomes. These two chromosomes code in general for the same things. And so the zygote now you could say it has 46 chromosomes, or you could say it has 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. And this is, once again, this is the case for human beings. If we're talking about some other species, instead of 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes, or 46 chromosomes in total, you might be talking about 10 pairs of homologous chromosomes, with 20 chromosomes in general. Now, to help with biologists, to help clarify when they're talking about the number of chromosomes for a given species, they introduce two words, haploid and diploid. And haploid is referring to when you have half the full contingency of chromosomes. So for human beings, the haploid number is 23. So this is the haploid number. It is 23. For another species, it would be something else. And haploid is based on the prefix hapl, or that's the prefix for single. So you have kind of a single member, I guess you could think of it, of each of the pairs. And now you have both of each pair. You have both chromosomes, or in each pair, or you have the full contingency. And this 46 chromosomes, this is called the diploid number. The diploid number for humans. The diploid number right over here. And when people talk in general, and we will speak in general when we start talking about mitosis and meiosis, for a given species, they will refer to the haploid number. They will refer to the haploid number as N chromosomes, and they'll refer to the diploid number as just twice that, as 2N chromosomes. So hopefully this gets you familiar with some of the vocabulary around fertilization and haploid and diploid and zygotes and gametes, and also makes you feel a little bit better about yourself, that just to exist, you, at least, I guess, half of your chromosomes had to win an incredibly competitive race.
All right.
In the last video, we saw an egg.
Okay, before we go anywhere else. Okay, so there's basically what we looked at yesterday, right? The complete summary of yesterday. But I think after seeing what we did yesterday and now looking at this today, I think the information makes a whole lot more sense. We agree?
That video is probably most helpful.
Yeah.
That video there?
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, I think he, like, just the drawings and the way he did it, I found it really neat.
Yeah.
That how the chromosomes, each one was a part of you, like your
Yeah.
DNA, right? So
I
your
never
hair
hair
color.
I never knew that they like joined together though. Like how they like there's two separate and then they like join together to make like how their two chromosomes join together after.
Yeah, and right, Kylie.
So say your mom has brown eyes and your dad has blue eyes and you don't get either color. Like
We're gonna get to that actually. That's, I think, as we go through this, I believe, correct? Yeah, as we get going through this, we're gonna get to that and you're gonna understand
Okay.
why traits work the way they do. Go
I
ahead.
bet you like if your mom had like blue eyes and your dad had like brown eyes or something, and you got like green eyes, it would probably be because somewhere else in your family someone had green eyes.
So we're gonna look at traits actually and how traits work and how you end up with like there's dominant traits and there's recessive traits and how one will take over and one, if you have two recessive traits, most redheads have two recessive traits, genes, okay, and that's how they end up with red hair. So and that's why it's also I think it's a 1 in 4, is it not? A 1 in 4 chance that you'll end up with 2 recessive genes, which means then that that's why there's so fewer redheads than there are of any other hair color. And then that goes for anything else, like eye color and whatever else.
What about, like, seahorses? How are they weird?
I have no idea.
Because the male carries
Good
babies.
thought.
The male carries the babies?
Yeah, so how does that work?
I do not know.
Maybe they're
Holy.
asexual.
No, because there's a female,
No,
the male
the
carries
female
Hold on a
lays
second.
eggs in the pouch in the male, and then the male fertilizes eggs and he carries them out and then kind of just ejects them once they're hatched.
Okay. I can't honestly say I've ever wondered about seahorses, right? All right, so I'm gonna come back for 1 second here and see where we're at.
And why? Rex just wants to learn. Rex, something over there. Rex, you're rocking up to be able to see.
Okay, so one of the things that we have to be able to do, and we'll do it probably through art, actually, more than anything, is compare mitosis with meiosis. Okay, compare asexual reproduction to sexual reproduction, which essentially is mitosis to meiosis, right? So what we'll do is I have an idea as to how I want to look at it. Excuse me. Here it is, though. Plants and animals must reproduce for several reasons, as you've learned. One of the reasons for reproduction is the survival of the organism. Reproduction can take place in 2 ways, either sexually or asexually. The table shown below gives you a brief summary of the 2 methods. Okay, so first things first, difference between asexual and sexual reproduction. 1 parent versus 2 parents, right? Asexual reproduction, the offspring genetically identical to the parent. In mitosis, you produce the exact same cell, right? So in asexual reproduction, you have clones of each other, right? And what was the insect? Aphid, right? Aphid was the one that we talked about the most. It had millions of them that were all identical to each other. Sexual reproduction, each parent contributes 1/2 the genetic information, which we learned a lot about today. Asexual reproduction, all genetic information is passed to the offspring from 1 parent. The offspring in sexual reproduction has genes from both parents. Genetic differences are rare and come from mutations. So this is an interesting one right here. That genetic differences in asexual are rare. And the only way that that happens would come from a mutation. And that's something we haven't talked about yet. Everything else we've talked about so far. Sexual reproduction allows greater genetic variation since offspring will always differ from parents and other offspring. Now remember, because you're from your parents, your kids will have similarities to your parents, but will have differences because of the significant others' genetic codes as well, right? Makes sense to everybody as we go. Okay, are there any other comments or questions about this chart? This is a good chart for you just to quickly go through. Okay,
Can I just copy that down?
you want to copy that down? Sure.
Can I take a picture of them?
Yeah, but in
You
your
can
book.
use a pen and write it down like everybody else does.
It's in the book.
Is it in that booklet?
Yeah.
All of them.
Oh, okay.
There's no need.
So I did like to see a few of you were copying down the information from that Khan Academy video too, which I think was a good idea. I think you'll get a better understanding for sure.
So like we can watch those.
Yeah, you're.
And just like
Yeah, I'm just basically hitting or missing on those videos. Oh, excuse me, excuse me. Excuse me. Oh, that's rare. Yeah, you can. I did a biology search, and I went through biology to find those videos. Okay, but yeah, they are all on that Khan Academy. I have an app on my iPad for Khan Academy, or you can just Google search it as well. But how you making out, Brock?
I'm on the second one on sexual reproduction.
Okay. No problem. Any other questions or comments about it while we're doing it? Even about the video itself? Okay, so I think we have a much better understanding of the chromosomes and how they work today than what we did yesterday.
Yeah.
For sure, from that. Yeah, Ella, go
A
ahead.
good documentary I think we should maybe watch in class is called The 9 Months That Made You. It's by BBC.
Okay. How long is it?
The first episode is 45 minutes.
45 minutes? Okay, maybe I'll have a peek at it and see what it looks like.
There's 3 episodes.
3 episodes of it.
Well,
Are we
for us,
gonna-
one week is not bad.
Well, we are running out of weeks though.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure, I want to get to that, the traits part of it before we do anything, in terms of videos, because I want it, that's the important part for biology in grade 11, so you need to know those traits, yes.
Are we gonna have a test on this before we do the traits, or are we gonna do it all?
No, we'll have a test, we'll do another one of those quizzes again, right away. Yeah, I like that idea. Sometimes we use your book and sometimes we don't. So, yeah, we'll have another self-quiz here, probably starting next week, yes?
When a cow has twins, then if one of the twins are a girl and the other twin's like a boy, you can't keep none of them because the boy he won't breed because the sperm's too rich in him, and then the girl can't get bred because she won't catch.
Really?
They're gonna sell them.
So,
And if they're both girls, then
they're
you
both sterile?
Yeah.
Seriously, I never knew that either.
and if they're both girls, both of them can catch. But
Right.
if they're both boys, both of them can breed.
Really? So you can't have a male and a female, twins, wow.
Well, we had a doctor just.
Yeah.
We had this cow and she had like twins, and one was a guy and one was a girl, and the guy ended up dying and like we put him in our barn so we weren't doing very well. And the girl was really weak, but we like bottle fed her and stuff. Just let her run around the yard and stuff. And, yeah, we ended up selling her. And I never really remember if she went to came home one day and she was gone.
She was on it. It was the favorite that was on. You pet dog,
I have one of 5 of them now.
How are you?
Because they're all twins.
Okay, so we only have about 5 more minutes left. You don't have to write this down, but we can, there's a lot of info here. So we'll just go through it quickly. What are some of the advantages of asexual reproduction? Advantages: it produces a new organism that's genetically identical to its parent. There's no need to find a partner. Less energy is required to produce offspring asexually. Offspring are usually well adapted to the environment because of the success of the parent. That one's kind of important, all right, because the parent will continue to adapt. And we talked about that in terms of bacteria, right? And you know that you have the bacteria that happens in fields. So you spray for fungicides and you spray for pesticides, and those are the types of things that asexually reproduce. Therefore, each generation, all right, the parents are adapting to the type of chemical that's coming into them. So that's why it becomes harder and harder to fight fungicides and pesticides because they're adapting. So that's an interesting one. An area favorable to the parent can quickly be colonized due to the high number of offspring the parent can generate in little time. So, however, once you find one thing that works to, for example, to fight disease, once you find that one thing that works for it, it'll kill all of it instantly, right? Because they are all exactly the same. So if you find that one thing that affects it, we talked about that the other day, okay? Some of the disadvantages: does not give rise to genetic variability in organisms. Reduced genetic variability. All offspring are copies of one parent. Sensitive to environmental changes. An asexual species runs the risk of suddenly disappearing because of a catastrophe that affects all organisms of the species that are genetically identical. But there's not too many things that asexually reproduce that you need to get rid of. Okay, but there are bacteria and viruses, not viruses, but bacteria and disease that you do want to get rid of. Okay, produces a new organism, results from a combination of traits of two parents. That's the advantage. Increases genetic viability in organisms, same species, and even with the offspring of one couple. In the long run, allows the best adaptations to be widespread within a species, especially in changing circumstances. Variability of the offspring within a series guarantees that a higher proportion will survive in perilous circumstances. Two parents can watch over the offspring. Disadvantages. Finding a reproductive partner and producing gametes requires the output of a lot of energy. Mechanisms for the transport of gametes for fertilization, for the attraction of the opposite sex, and for competition within a species must be put in place. Wasteful expenditure of energy if conditions are stable for a long time. The genetic results of meiosis and opposite fertilization are unpredictable. And genetic errors happen more frequently because meiosis is more complex than mitosis, and diploid organisms have more chromosomes to double. Okay, so you knew a couple of those as we go forward. That's probably all you need. This is. No, I'm going to leave the last two. Okay, do you have your sheets from the other day?
I need one.
Somebody needs one? Okay, who needs one? It's me. Now you can get one later. Who else needs one? Paige? You also have a self-storage. Anybody else need? Sexual reproduction, yeah. Pardon me? No, I don't have them marked yet. Actually, what am I doing right now? Grade 10's math. Oh, I do have your projects. I'll give those back to you right away. Yeah, good. Okay, what I need you to do then, today, is you can work on, actually there's even a crossword there, which is kind of
Yeah, I've seen that.
okay, so you have lesson 1 and lesson 2. You can do the questions with that today, and Monday we'll finish that off. So lesson 3. Yeah. Other than that, I think we're pretty good for today. Any questions or comments?
Listen to music.
Can you listen to music? Yeah, you can listen to music for 15 minutes. Any